thanks everyone for coming out tonight. I think we've got an exciting few topics to talk about here. I'm sure there's at least a couple of you that aren't on the list, so as I'm going through the towns, if I miss any towns or organizations, we will certainly catch up with you at the end of the list here. So I'm Brian Voigt. I'm a Senior Natural Resources Planner at the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. Work mostly on water quality restoration side, but also dabble a little bit in emergency management when Keith is overwhelmed with his responsibilities. Why don't you introduce yourself as well, Keith?
I'm Keith Cubbin. I do work at CVRPC, do emergency management and transportation, primarily infrastructure side, the things that fail in the disasters. But yeah, just here to help support this process. Keith
will be the scribe, so if anything is incorrectly noted, we do know who to blame on that. Okay, so I'm the first piece here. We've got about 15 minutes. We're going to go town by town, so not necessarily everyone from each town explaining their perspective. It'd be really nice if we could kind of narrow that down to a unified perspective from the towns, but as I call out the towns, definitely want to hear who you are, what you do in the town, and then maybe one representative from the town can summarize your experience from the 2023 and 2024 events. So let's get started with Duxbury. Is there someone here from Duxbury?
Anybody else here from Duxbury?
Yeah, here.
Oh, familiar, huh? So I am Mae McKee, and I live on Crosswood Hill in Duxbury. And I talked with our select board chairman just before this meeting. In 23, we had very limited impact, less than 5 houses, one for a buyout. In 24, we suffered severe infrastructure damage, $750,000 worth, we think. We have 2 houses on the buyout and 2 or 3 other really complicated cases. That's what we've got going on over there.
Great. You want to just say
Sure. Yeah, my name is David Wendt. I'm with the Planning Commission.
Excellent. Thanks. Welcome to you both. Middlesex.
I'm Zara Vincent. I'm with the Select Board and the Chair of the Road Committee. We also have Mike Klein, who is a retired river scientist and is on the Road Committee as well, and Eric is our road foreman.
One of you want to talk about 2023, 2024 experience?
Eric is the best man for that job.
Devastation. I think we were just over $3 million worth of devastation in 23 and also in 24. So, yes, quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else from Middlesex?
No,
just the 3? Yep, just the 3. Okay. Moretown.
Yeah, Clark Amadon. I'm with the Planning Commission.
Josh Melcher with the Planning Commission.
Moretown, a little over $3 million of damage this year. This year was worse than 2024. Still trying to get reimbursements back from 2023, dealing with usual road erosion, culverts, rebuilding roads, the common road, the mountain road, over on Herringbrook and Jones Brook. Those are the areas that were hit the hardest. And John, do you want to talk about the mitigation work that you just
Well, I don't know how many buyouts. I know that there's some people that have applied, but I don't know what the status is. We have one, if anybody has driven on Route 100B towards Waitsfield, you've seen that house that's in the sky in the middle of the village, so that's one mitigation that's going on right now. And got some updated numbers because I just talked with our road foreman, and both storms, the damages were between $4 and $5 million for the 2023 and 2024.
Okay. How about Northfield?
Here,
Hi.
if there's anyone else. Lydia Petty, I'm on the select board in Northfield. And we were very lucky in 24, very minimal damage. We actually, well, I guess we had the worst damage in December than in July.
Right.
And then 23, it was about $800,000 of damage. We have still an active buyout from Irene, because Irene's when we really experienced what a lot of you all are unfortunately having happen. And there's one buyout from 23 that we're working on.
Okay. Waterbury.
Roger Clapp, I'm chair of the select board. I've got Alyssa Johnson, who's also on the select board. Mike Dacey, who's with Crew, doing the recovery program, and John Malter, who's with the Natural Disaster Preparedness Committee. We had substantial damage in both the recent floods and even more, of course, during Irene. We've got, I think, 8 buyouts approved at the moment. Approved by us, but not yet by, I think, probably 6 of those that will get approved by the state and FEMA. Municipal damage, we had this past 24, we had 2 major culverts get washed out that had to be replaced, and then some work right by the Winooski River Bridge that has gotten hit in every storm. And then a number of houses, Mike may have numbers on the number of residential and business properties that also were damaged by both storms.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have it broken down by town. Crew does serve Waterbury along with Middlesex, Moretown, Duxbury, and Bolton. Across those towns, we've spoken with between 400 and 500 affected homes. Many of them were affected to an extent that they were able to take care of themselves, but we're working with about 100 homes in sort of, again, varied levels of current recovery, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
Great. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means in the
And just in terms of mitigation, we're in conversation with the state about purchasing the cornfields. It's about a 40-acre major cornfield to try to do floodplain enhancement there to mitigate the flooding in the downtown area.
Sure. Okay, how about Worcester?
I'm John Kading on the select board, and my wife Tony, who is on the planning commission. Worcester is sort of a like so many other villages, a little town. Our budget has been less than $1 million, but in '23 our damages were over $3 million, and this year over $4 million. So we're struggling to handle that with a part-time town clerk, a part-time town treasurer, and a very, very part-time town grant administrator. Otherwise, nobody to, aside from the grateful help from the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission assisting us, we have, it's very difficult to get these repairs going. Now, luckily, we had very little structural damage in town, but terrible damage to the roads, culverts, bridges. We just completed our last project from the '23 storm, and the monies have been obligated, so we're recovering from '23. And we do have a property north of town on the north branch of the Winooski, which is a property which has flooded frequently over the last 50 years, but in the last 3 or 4 years is so bad the house is now filled with mold, it's inhabitable. And we're working to try to have all the structures on that raised and this whole property turned into a floodplain, which will be great for saving sort of Worcester to a degree, saving Montpelier because the floodplain will be developed. We're working with the River Conservancy and the VEM, and we have hopes that this will actually happen.
Yeah, that's great.
It could be very helpful. Yeah.
I think we'll definitely want to talk a little bit more about that in the coming questions as well. Any towns that I missed? Okay, let's take we've got about 5 or 6 minutes here left in the first portion here, and if we could just really quickly, for the organizations that are here, if you could just introduce yourself and maybe mention the area of the basin that you do work. Michelle, you want to start?
Sure. I'm Michelle Braun. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the Winooski River. And we work in the whole entire watershed. So I've done projects in almost all of your towns, I think.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Ira?
Sure. Ira Shaddis, I'm the Director of Friends of the Mad River. I work with Michelle a fair amount. Our geography is a little bit smaller.
And Steve, I think you're VEM, yeah?
Yeah, Steve Levy with Vermont Emergency Management. Just doing everything we can to help towns, mainly forward-thinking mitigation type work, not so much the immediate repairs, but trying to get it like the floodplain project you talked about. So, yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Is there someone here from the Lamoille County Planning Commission? Okay, and last but not least.
Hi everybody, my name is Josh Schwartz. I am Executive Director of the Mad River Valley Planning District, a 3-town planning entity serving the towns of Waitsfield, Warren, and Fayston. As far as damage is concerned, I just would like to highlight the town of Fayston, which was impacted quite substantially in 2024. The Mad River Valley generally was not so impacted in 2023. Tropical Storm Irene was the greatest impact and a lot of efforts around that and the response and resilience conversations that we had. But when 2024 in Fayston, Warren had about 3 inches of rain, and Fayston had about 10 inches of rain in North Fayston, and about $3.5 million worth of damage in 2 municipal bridges. In my office, we went in inventoried damage and identified 16 to 18 different roads that had substantial damage, but mostly high elevation erosive flooding, not the inundation flooding that had been experienced previously at Waitsfield and Warren.
Great, thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
So just really quickly, because not everyone touched on this, can I see a show of hands from the towns that have buyouts from either the 2023 or 2024 storm? So it's everywhere but Worcester? Okay. And not Moretown either, okay. And then in terms of organizations, how many organizations have worked on buyouts of a sort? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for that perspective. Okay, so for this next chunk of time, we're going to talk about what y'all are working on in your communities with the goal of increasing adaptation and reducing future flood impacts. So I could either go around town by town again. If folks want to just jump in and get the ball rolling, we can do it that way as well. Okay, people like being put on the hot seat. So I will call on our friends in Moretown.
So tell me the question again.
Sure. So the question is, what are you working on, or what do you hope to work on in your community with the goal of increasing adaptation and reducing future flood impacts?
Well, we happen to be working on a town plan at this point. So for us, it's these events have been a real charge and energizing us in terms of how to work through that. It's one of the town plans are in some ways are very prescribed. The outlines are relatively similar from town to town. The emphasis changes in terms of historical perspectives in towns and what happens there. But I think for us, putting together an approach to how to be in the middle of climate change that will resonate in the future. So as we put together our town plan, we're going to be spending a lot of time in terms of thinking about river corridor development. John has been working on flood mitigation plan in the town. We have a we also have the challenges of, that everyone, we all have in terms of housing. So if you're gonna start limiting development and trying to energize how to stay a lot more hardened and ready for these kind of natural disasters, you also have to be able to think about, well, what's the impact if we're going to be removing certain areas from development in terms of where we're going to encourage housing. So that's, for us, a significant issue. I don't know, John, if you want to...
Yeah, the other thing that we're working on right now is we're updating our local hazard mitigation plan. So that's ongoing, and one of the things that, unfortunately, much of our road infrastructure got damaged in the last 2 floods. So the good news with that is that we are using FEMA public assistance money, and we're looking to rebuild those structures to codes and standards. And I think that that's going to make a huge difference. And with regards to mitigation and flood corridor, one of the challenges is, as we're looking at our plan, and also with hazard mitigation, is we just got Act 121 that just passed, and there's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen with that in terms of the river corridor. And I guess that's one of the challenges I have, and I guess we're working with the Regional Planning Commission and the other towns of, like, how do we navigate that? Because there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be dictated to us that, we can do all the planning we want now, but it's not really going to make a difference because there's going to be things that are mandated. Now, we'll have a chance to weigh in on that, but it's kind of a wild card in knowing on how that's all going to fit together.
Sure.
And trying to maximize the mitigation monies that are out there. To, one of the things that I wasn't as prepared for at this meeting, but I will be for our local on our meeting that we're having on Friday, is to get a better sense of what our candidates are for potential for buyouts.
Okay. How about Middlesex?
Yes, can you repeat the question now?
Sure, of course. What are you working on, or what do you hope to work on in your community with the goal of increasing adaptation and reducing future flood impacts?
So, unfortunately, as a town, we have a town clerk, a town treasurer, and 4 road crew that are paid positions, and everything else is volunteer. We do have a really wonderful group of volunteers who came together to create a road committee. And the first thing that, I know this doesn't seem like part of it, but communication. So I've personally taken it upon myself to put in Front Porch Forum 2-3 times a week when the flooding was happening, what roads were being affected, where we were working, that sort of thing. Because obviously when these things happen emotionally, the place we get, especially one after another, just letting the community know what was going on was a huge help. Crew was a huge help to us, kind of working with them to figure out. Going forward, also funding, we put, part of our road committee is trying to get grants, those hazard mitigation grants, that sort of thing. We had originally been filling them out because we have so many dirt roads, and they're just muddy. They need to be rebuilt from the ground up, and we know that. We've fixed a couple of portions of our roads, but we know that really all of them need to be redone because, when they were done 50 years ago, it was the wrong material, and it's just wreaking havoc. So we've got regular issues with our roads beyond flooding. We got really lucky this year because we had a huge company, Dirt Tech, that was fixing us from 2023 that was there when the 2024 floods happened. And we have literally upgraded almost every culvert in town, upsized it, made it the right material. And then another challenge that we've had is FEMA, I guess originally telling us.
We'll get to challenges at the next question. Because I know that can be, that could dominate the rest of the evening for sure.
So we did, Friends funding, fixing, finding the spots, and looking to the future. And Mike is a huge help to us. He's just done a LiDAR research along the Great Brook.
One of our issues, not unlike a lot of towns in the Winooski Basin, is our narrow valleys were once lake beds. And so the roads and houses in those narrow valleys are susceptible to this dissolution of these ancient lake clays. And Great Brook in Middlesex is trying really hard to catch up with Great Brook in Plainfield, which is in Memphis.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out going forward, can we actually manage this road? How do we stabilize this road and therefore the residences along it? Is it possible to stabilize these clays? And so we're hoping to begin the work, the assessment and engineering to figure that out. And if not, what do we do?
Great.
What are the next steps?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. How about Waterbury?
Well, I think we tend to divide things into three groups. One, response, then recovery and resilience, and then mitigation. And in response, crew for the past two storms has really taken the lead, but we did form a committee that John now leads. Then he just completed a guide for how to do response. I don't know, John, if you want to
it's
go through that a bit.
It's still in draft form, but we're getting closer to completion. It's pretty much a contingency plan for dealing with what the obstacles are with the community, with the houses, trying to plan ahead with looking at what might be in folks' basements that shouldn't be in the basements any longer, that let's get it out of there before a flood occurs, working with these people, offering them assistance, anticipating what we have for equipment for cleaning up, inventorying, things of that nature, really trying to get a scorecard of all the things that will help when the problem arises. And one other thing we're doing, besides a plan, is we're going to have a one-page sheet in the town report that will kind of give everybody a heads up on things that they can do on their own to kind of plan ahead for any event of this nature. And maybe everybody collectively will be thinking more in that manner. Because it's all communications,
Yep.
and it's reinforcing the communications.
Yeah, that's great. Can one of you say just a couple more words about the farmland buyout? I mean, because that's a pretty big undertaking in terms of like what you're hoping to do in your community. The property buyout for the
cornfield?
Yeah, the cornfield. Yeah.
Sure. If you want to take it on.
Well, the most important, I would just say, it's currently owned by the state of Vermont, so it's part of the state hospital complex in Waterbury. So property transfers will have to go through the legislature. So candidly, as a town, we're struggling a little bit with the fact that it's owned by the state. And so right now, to move forward with the project, that would be a state prerogative. We are willing to assume it municipally, but as of now, we can't take any action because the legislature isn't in session yet. We've also candidly looked at possibilities for floodplain mitigation, some of which are not within our town. So that's a piece of consideration as well. As Roger said, we've approved about 8 buyouts in the community as well.
Great, thank you. How about Worcester?
So, the typical nuts and bolts stuff, enlarging culverts. We've got 2 big culverts that will be replaced by bridges over the next 12, 18 months. But there are a couple sections of road that have washed out again and again, and we notice that trees have fallen across culverts and blocked things, and so we said, let's get the trees out of there beyond the town right away. We talked to the private landowners and said, let's cut trees back 30 feet with their permission to keep those big trees out of the ditches, and that was very successful. Everyone was eager to be a part of that, so that sort of stuff is happening. And then this buyout, as chair of the select board, of course, when we don't have a town health officer, and this fellow came and asked us, I'm the town health officer because there isn't one other than me. And so I was asked to go and condemn this house, and that's how the whole thing started, about turning this place into a floodplain. This old farm that I'd known since I've been in town, which seems not like a long time, but it's nearly 50 years, we were just saying. In order to get this building condemned, and this fella just wanted to move up the hill a little bit, he just wanted enough money to get himself running water and electricity to the new shack he was building. And then he would turn this land over to whomever would assume control of it. And it took a long time for anybody to become interested in this, quite frankly. I was advised that the best group was the Vermont River Conservancy, and it's not their fault that they couldn't get sort of on board with this. They're, just a few people with a million jobs, no one to do all the stuff. But finally, when they saw this property, they were very, very excited because it's just perfect. And they got Vermont Emergency Management involved, and so, but the administration was unbelievably cumbersome for a town with no one to administer it. So the River Conservancy assumed that responsibility, will assume that responsibility as we move forward with the town doing a little bit.
And the status of that project, it's ongoing?
It's right now, they're waiting, I'm waiting for the River Conservancy to let me sign on the dotted line. Actually, we're at our select board meeting Monday. Their paperwork wasn't quite ready. We were eager for it to happen. And with luck, I will be able to sign by the end of this week.
Great.
So that it will go forward.
Okay.
We hope.
Josh, you want to give the MRV rundown, the Mad River Valley rundown?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, the graphic, there was a graphic in the presentation earlier that showed the three different strategies across the watershed, and that's been a lot of the approach that we've been taking collectively in the Mad River Valley, the minimizing risk in floodplains and specific targeted efforts to both conserve properties but also minimize development. So the river corridor legislation that was talked about before, and efforts similar to that, but targeted efforts mostly focused on the main stem. I know you don't want me to talk about other challenges, but the part that we haven't focused so much or had success on is steep roads and the effects that happen in Facein and other hillside communities with the more recent flooding. But a lot of the focus has been focused on inundation flooding and minimizing risk. There's some larger scale some smaller things like rain garden projects and ways to allow water to make its way into the ground. Everything from rain gardens to larger projects and ponding and things with hillsides. But the biggest project that's going on right now is focusing on development in the places where we want development to happen in our community, specifically Waitsfield Village. Waitsfield has Waitsfield Village and Irisville. Waitsfield Village is the traditional village with a covered bridge, and Irisville is just right next to it up on the hill. A traditional agricultural community, agricultural hamlet, and that's where most of the commercial development has happened over the past 50 or so years in the region. And really, there's a lot of work going on led by the Planning Commission in Waitsfield focusing on attracting development there. So everything from wastewater infrastructure and having the infrastructure to accommodate that type of growth and infill and retiring septic systems that are in the floodplain. And so reducing risks as well as attracting development in the places where we want it, in places that are less susceptible to flooding.
Great, thanks.
Is the sewer system going to access both of those villages?
Yes.
How about Duxbury?
Well, Duxbury is a little bit like a deer in the headlights, I would say. In asking the select board chair today about mitigation and answering those questions. Thanks for putting those out ahead of time, that was really helpful. You know, his comment was, we lost 3.5 miles on Ward Hill, and it's all flash flood, it's not inundation. And how do you mitigate against that? We have 57 miles of road in Duxbury, and 47 of it is unpaved. And it's the steepest inhabited terrain in the state. So we struggle to keep our roads together at all. I was on the road commission for quite a while after Irene, and I would say probably half of our roads are not properly built roads. They were logging roads that once the logging got done, they sold off those lots, and then we had to figure out what we were gonna do, and it was a big problem in our town to take those and change the class of them. That didn't go well, they're still quite.
Sounds like you're still working on that.
Right? Yeah, so we're still, we're definitely still working on that. Main Street is pretty much a floodplain. It just is, and that's where the pavement is. One of the things that we're doing is we're gonna be hiring an administrative person. We have, I think, a full-time town clerk, and all the other positions are part-time. So we really struggle with keeping up with paperwork to try to make it all happen for a community, a rural community like this. And then more so when you're talking about FEMA, and, you know, trying to get back any of that money. They have done a great job, our road crew's been great putting this back together for sure. But they're open to ideas. How can we mitigate what happened on Ward Hill? 3.5 miles was lost just on that one road. So that's how Duxbury's feeling.
Great, thanks. And
I
then,
would say though, I work with crew as well, and on behalf of Duxbury. And one of the things that we're doing is getting together across the watershed. We've just started doing this to talk about mitigation possibilities. So from the citizens who live there, but work for Agency of Natural Resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those folks know all these pockets of things that are going on that we wouldn't know. And at Crew, we're pretty sure that coming up above the town lines to get together to work on this is going to be key.
yeah,
So that's
kind of what we're about here tonight as well, but yeah, that's great that you've already taken the initiative to get that ball rolling.
Yeah, thank you.
Can we hear from Northfield? I think you're the last
Sure.
towns.
I think we're doing a lot of things that I've heard already, increasing communication, updating plans, our hazard mitigation plan and emergency management planning. I think shout out to Michelle Braun over there for our Dog River Park has really become something our community's been enormously grateful for in these last couple of floods. We may have a buyout that's adjacent to the park. So now we can look forward to how do we maintain the park, how do we take care of it, how do we kind of observe which species have done well, and replanting trees and maintaining the plantings that were so beautifully done when it was originally put in, dealing with the knotweed that's coming in with the future floods, trying to make sure the paths. One thing we've struggled with, if anybody knows how to deal with FEMA, and also trying to have the trails being really accessible to all users, tensions between accessibility and impermeable surfaces, and so that's going on. We still have one buyout from Irene, and one of the difficulties, well, we're not talking about difficulties, but we're trying to figure out housing, because getting people out of the building, they don't have anywhere else to go. We are going to be removing a significant dam that's right next to our main street, the Cross Brothers Dam, in this coming year. And we're really looking at housing development in, like, developing the areas we want developed. And we have some nice, bigger projects for us happening in the works.
Great, thanks. So I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that we heard a lot of similar themes here. Maybe you take a little bit of consolation in that and start to build around some of these ideas. In this next section here, we got about 15 minutes to maybe a little bit less to talk about what are your needs, where are there gaps, what are the obstacles to accomplishing the lofty goals that were just established in this last section. Any volunteers to start this one out? This is your kind of chance to complain a little bit, only about the third part of that. What are the obstacles? But
yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
It just occurs to me we all are fighting the same battle with trying to get to do the administrative stuff to deal with FEMA. Wouldn't it be great if there could be some sort of a state program that was like a class action lawsuit where instead of everyone fighting big tobacco, for example, there's a class action where all the people get together and they all unify to fight tobacco? Wouldn't it be great if the state had a class action sort of situation where at least some of the basic stuff dealing with FEMA was dealt with, and the towns could do their individual part, but sort of the major roadblocks would be ironed out by the state. And it would be so much easier for each of the small municipalities that don't have anyone to do that work to sort of make their way through the morass of paperwork that's involved. A thought.
Could I jump into that and
Please.
say that one of the things that FEMA has told us is that in other parts of the country, they deal with county governments.
Yep.
Yes.
And that
Yep.
just completely
great.
puzzles them when
Yeah.
they land here and we don't have county government.
Yep. But we're small enough so we could do this, we could be a state.
Yes.
We're not even,
Agreed.
not a million people.
Agreed.
So.
It's smaller than many counties. That,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
Can I ask a question too to everybody here
Sure.
regarding FEMA? Was everybody else told that, like, no worries, we'll take care of it, we'll do the spreadsheet, and then a year later, you've got to fill out all this minute detail into a spreadsheet and for every road and...
Fortunately, Worcester had people that have been through this enough times, so they were way ahead of that curve, thank God. And they had every single road, every single truck, every single load of gravel dealt with individually.
So I don't want to dig too deep into that, but let's just acknowledge FEMA administration as probably a common theme.
Yeah.
Organizations, municipalities.
But it's a tremendous amount of turnover that happens at FEMA. It's like you're working with some person, and you got a good relationship with them, and then they're gone, and then you got to start over again. So I think there's a lot of frustration in that regard. The one thing I just want to add to what you were saying is I know that there is a study going on in the legislature to look at maybe some type of reorganization for counties to deal specific with flooding. We'll see how that goes. Before I lived in Vermont, I worked for the flood control district in Arizona. Everyone laughs, flooding in Arizona. But the thing that was good about that was, and that district served 3.5 million people, and like what you were saying, this is 600,000. Something like that model could be, not necessarily at that time, flood control was build as many dams and channels as possible, and I'm not saying that won't work here, but at least the governance model might be really helpful in helping towns and deal with the administrative and working with FEMA.
Great, thanks. We heard from Waterbury, one of their big challenges is requiring an act of the legislature to accomplish one of their big goals. Do you have other obstacles, gaps that you want to mention for Waterbury?
I want to recognize Duxbury because one of the big challenges that we all have is that it takes aggregate to fix all these roads, and Duxbury is out. Waterbury is out, Facein is about to be out, and one of the select board members in Duxbury organized a regional series of meetings to try to identify how do we get aggregate at a reasonable price. one of the solutions was to work with the railroads, because they use a lot of aggregate that can be shipped very inexpensively, and Waterbury's got a great place where we could build a siding, and we'd be glad to be a depot, a regional depot for reasonably priced aggregate, and save the roads from all the wear and tear and the trucks and diesel and all that good stuff.
Some of that happened after Irene with the rails. That's how we moved aggregate around after Irene.
And I'll just say funding too, again, acknowledging we're one of the more well-resourced municipalities in this room still. We're saying we're willing to take on this project, but candidly, some of the reason it also hasn't happened is because we also want to make sure that if there is FEMA eligibility, that would have required the state to still be the owner. The ultimate, whose pocketbook is funding coming out of, and we're a community of 5,000, and if we're doing a multi-acre floodplain road with a $5 million project, that's not something we're going to put on just our taxpayers. So what, maybe the resources do already exist, I'm not denying that there's ones out there, but I think, you know, there's big ambitious projects. I think other things I wrote is capacity and expertise. Again, we are one of the most resourced municipalities. We have a manager, I have a municipal planner, and I still feel like it's no one's first priority to be doing long-term flood mitigation and planning. You all at the Regional Planning Commission are serving, you know, more than a whole county, and so I think there just continues to be that need. We've mentioned the buyouts we approved. We are one that had more requests than those that we approved. So we have a volunteer select board of 5 saying, what's the long-term buyout strategy for our community? I personally would have loved to phone a friend to say, you know, who should I be working with to have a more strategic approach to this beyond what we all are thinking as volunteers.
Can I add to the buyout thing? You know, right now, the folks who are eligible for buyouts are those that are in special flood hazard areas. And many of our houses are damaged that aren't in the special flood hazard area, they're eroded away. And those folks need help. And I think one of the biggest constraints that we have in Vermont is that we need a way to do buyouts for people who are damaged by erosion outside of FEMA's floodplain. Because it's very common in Vermont, and FEMA's not, I don't look to FEMA to ever solve that one, to be honest.
Yeah, it seemed a lot easier when we were just thinking, oh, if we build outside the river corridors, but as Josh's example with Facein and Middlesex experienced that, I know several other communities in central Vermont experienced that same kind of response to this most recent round of storms. Josh, you want to talk about any particular challenges or gaps
I mean,
for the valley?
One that I haven't heard yet is the larger land use challenge. I mean, we have areas of vulnerability, and I know of at least 2 examples of people who didn't take buyouts because they didn't have anywhere else to go. And I think that so often the focus is on the risk, and I think and well-intentioned regulations or other things to minimize people being in places of risk, but it really, the amount of opportunities continue to shrink. And so I think it's as much as we say these are the places where we don't want things to happen, we need to identify and incentivize the type of actions and activities that we want to have happen. And I mean, I think, and a lot of that looks like density, and that's difficult to talk about in Vermont. But I think that's where a lot of the opportunity lies, and it requires things like infrastructure for that, and investment in infrastructure for that to happen. So that's every time I think about that, I start to feel overwhelmed, even though I'm a regional planner, because it's really hard to do that work and to have those conversations. But I do think that that's a part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Josh.
Yeah, I think there's, you know, people at my age experienced the communities they lived in as kids, being streets torn up when the wastewater projects and community wastewater was put in, tertiary, secondary, all of that was federal funded. And now we're at a point where the funding is fleeting, and it's not centralized, so it's hard to find. You know, there's lots of grant programs, and also state and some federal help, but it's dispersed, and it's difficult to find exactly where to start. And we're lucky in Moretown, the town clerk is incredibly competent, and as unfortunately gone through this enough times so that it's become a sort of a routine part of the job that they do, which is great. And we also were lucky to have someone that retired who was did a lot of construction projects and was able to be help the road crew. But it's, you know, we just got lucky that way. And the people, the town clerk was overwhelmed. This particular person who worked with the road crew also got overwhelmed and was not planning on doing this as part of retirement. So
he's been enjoying it. Don't
Pardon
kid.
me?
He's been enjoying it. Don't kid yourself.
Yeah.
He likes to
That's
complain a
not
little
what he
bit.
tells me.
But he does a great job.
I'd rather be fishing, but anyway, and you know, I think there's the other, you know, the infrastructure is huge, because if you have infrastructure, you have some flexibility in terms of wastewater. And in Moretown, we have no centralized wastewater. There's the village. We had a project that unfortunately is not going to come to fruition, but that would harden the village. It would give people an opportunity to say, okay, well, if my septic system is about to fail, and most of the septic systems in the village are quite old, 40 or 50 years old, and this is probably not true for a lot of the villages in this room, that it becomes, well, how much do I try to stay here if I'm not going to be able to get rid of my wastewater? How am I going to take care of my wastewater?
Yep.
So I think that's part of the dealing with future flooding events, is that it becomes the possibility of hollowing out some of these villages is real, and all it needs is one more significant event for people to say, I'm done, I'm walking away. And that has happened in some places, and you know, people who are looking to find another spot to move to are stuck. So, you know, give the towns more help in terms of, you know, whether it be regionally or statewide, have more opportunity to look for in one place for funding would be really significant.
Great, thanks. Any towns we haven't heard from that want to chime in on other gaps or challenges that they see?
I'm just gonna say one thing that we're trying to figure out is how to reach out to people who have special needs in these events, to know, you know, what their driveways look like, making sure emergency vehicles can get to them.
Yeah, I mean, to hop onto that a little bit, for all the miles and thousands, millions of dollars that have gone into fixing the municipal roads, which the towns have done a fantastic job with, there are so many miles of private roads, so many miles of driveways that go to one house that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars each on a repair, and you have residents that are like totally blindsided, don't know what to do. And I realize that's not at the town responsibility, it is a private road, but it's an issue.
No, but the lack of road
that's really-
associations,
yeah.
or formal road associations to deal with private roads in cases where there's multiple houses. I know the one house at the end of the road, that's a little bit different scenario, but, yeah.
It's also, like, Facein is a good example where it's not like these roads are not connected to the town roads, right? And so
Right.
if you have major damage, undersized culvert, et cetera, uphill, there's a very good chance that it will have consequences on the municipal roads.
And I think a challenge, an obstacle or a challenge that I would say that probably affects both sides of that is engineering expertise to build back correctly is hard to find and expensive, no matter who's paying for it.
Yep. Okay, so we're rapidly running out of time here, so let's address the last question here. Are there areas where you hope to or already are collaborating with other communities? We've heard a few examples of those tonight. Anybody else want to bring one forward? Yeah, sorry.
We are not yet, however, we would love to, share a grant writer with other communities, somebody who can find us money, yeah.
Moretown is potentially going to maybe partner with Waterbury in terms of extending wastewater over into North Moretown. So that's it's a work in progress at this point, very much at the beginning and the germination stage, but it's something that makes a lot of sense for us. So, hopefully.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for Waterbury too. We have excess capacity and would love to take you on more clients. And it could really expand housing opportunities.
Yeah.
Because there is buildable property over in North Moretown.
Yep. Other examples of ways you either are or might want to work together in the future?
I would just love to see more case studies, and maybe they exist and someone needs, but the amount of times I've found the Waterbury Irene archive and sent it to someone as a reference, just thinking about, I don't know how many times Lydia has explained Dog River Park, and I genuinely value the relationship building, so I think that piece is important, but people say like, what is the roadmap for a long-term recovery plan? You know, I work for a statewide organization and we're figuring it out in 4 different towns right now, and so it would just be great to know what are the models that other towns are doing, right, wrong, successes, challenges, and it's so much work to do the work itself that someone who could be at that higher level to capture and share the stories I would find really valuable.
I was in a meeting today with solid waste managers from around the state, and one of the conversations dealt with sites to be able to stage hazardous waste, oil contaminated soils, oily sludge, various just oil and water in fractionating tanks, and it needs to be areas that are paved and truck accessible. And so if everybody could put their thinking caps on with looking at their inventory of space around their communities, this could be very helpful in a lot of spots.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting opportunity. I want to get back to, oh, go ahead, Josh.
I just, in the context of the more of the response side, it's starting to recognizing that, like, with the July 10th, 2024 flooding in Fayston, how much support came from neighboring communities, and trucking as one example. And in some of the conversations and the analysis of that event, and dialogue that we've had is recognizing that that's happening mostly just because people know people,
right.
Which is great, and that's how our communities work. And in Fayston, their town administrator or select board assistant and road foreman both retired or are in the process of retiring right now. And so these things built on relationships are great, but there is turnover. And I don't even know how long Patty has been with the town, but at least 2 decades. And so, in having a conversation of, are there structures to support that kind of intermunicipal agreements? It's great to be able to pick up the phone and call Patty and say, what do I need? But Patty might be doing 12 other things, and so we're creating more structures and agreements that can be enacted that are a little less dependent on it and an individual. God forbid that person's on vacation the day that the flood happens.
Sure.
Emergency management in Duxbury has created MOUs with surrounding towns for that very thing. So we work with Moretown, and in this set of flooding, South Duxbury was cut off. We couldn't get to our own people on Ward Hill, and it was Moretown that came forward and did that, and likely Waitsfield and Fayston as well. But MOUs ahead of time is a really good idea, and that's a great way to start those relationships with kind of new people too.
Yep.
So it's a good way to introduce it.
On the communication side, I think that, I mean, this is also within our town, but I think across town, the state communication about road closures and roads affected, and also rivers that are flooding, actively flooding or at risk. Some of that is covered, but it doesn't really happen across town. So like with the recent 2024 flooding, 100 was closed off, but Google Maps was sending people still down 100 and taking back roads, which were all totally washed out. And so it would be a lot easier rather than each of our road crews trying to communicate with our select boards and then communicating with our own communities, for that all to go through some sort of regional or state communication system that people know they can get accurate, up-to-date, comprehensive information about both washouts but also danger, even as it's actively happening.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I wanted to get back to one other example here in the closing minutes. I think it was Waterbury. You said you're looking at potential mitigation sites outside of your town boundaries. Was that you? And you don't have to get specific on the property, but could you talk a little bit more about your thinking? And I'd be curious to hear from others if you've had similar thoughts as you've been driving down the road of a neighboring town. Do you only look upstream? Are you looking for downstream? Yeah.
Post-Irene, there was a study, commissioned hydrology study, that identified 3 significant projects that could be undertaken to mitigate flooding. One was the cornfield that we talked about. One was hardening the state complex, which was implemented, the largest state project in history in Vermont. And then the third was a farm in Duxbury that part of it acts as sort of a choke point and leads to flooding in downtown Waterbury and parts of Duxbury. So we've been in touch with the property owner for a while. There's some interest, but that seems to have faded. We've talked to the governor about eminent domain. He has no stomach for it, so that one is not likely to move forward in the short term.
Sure. Other towns that have thought about?
Well, I know there's been a lot of talk about looking up the river of Montpelier, and certainly that would benefit a lot of these communities as well. I'm interested in, similar to, Worcester, Northfield, and Waterbury, looking at these larger floodplains.
2-minute warning, okay, folks?
I'm interested in collaborating with other communities on, as I said, some of these narrower valleys and smaller floodplain issues, and to what extent might we see some relief from the stream and road related erosion by working in, for instance, Plainfield and Middlesex working more closely together on some of these issues. I know there's other folks in our towns that are doing the same thing.
Sure. Any final thoughts here in the closing 90 seconds? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just make a pitch to the towns, folks that are from towns in cruise service area, which again, Waterbury, Bolton, Duxbury, Middlesex, and Moretown. Crew does do, and right now we are very much in a response mode, but we have sort of set ourselves up to really stick around for the long term, and provided that we don't have another flood in 6 months, be active in the more mitigation-focused, forward-looking space. We do have a developing committee that is working on mitigation issues, trying to draw folks in from all the communities that we serve. So if anyone is interested in that or knows somebody in their community who you think might be interested, come say hi and get you in touch.
Great. Well, thanks everyone so much for your input here. I think it's been really valuable, certainly for me, hopefully for all of you as well. And I will do my absolute best not to embarrass the group with my 3-minute summary that I get about 45 seconds to prepare for.
Thank you.
No pressure. No pressure.